Big promises from the incoming U.S. president.
On day one, I will launch the largest deportation program in American history.
He's talking about millions of people, but how is that going to work, and how should Canada prepare? To untangle this, Paul Hunter is in Washington. Catherine Cullen is in Ottawa. So, Paul, day one, Donald Trump wants to launch this mass deportation program. Where does he start?
As soon as he walks into the White House on Inauguration Day, Adrienne, right off the bat, he's made clear his immediate priority will be to go after migrants with criminal records and any migrant known to be or suspected to be in a gang. As he's put it, they will be hunted down and arrested. But broadly speaking, Trump's goal is to deport every undocumented migrant in the country. And there are 11 million of them. That's more than everyone in Alberta and British Columbia combined. A massive undertaking. That said, the guessing is that a realistic number is 1 million deportations per year. So how to do that? Well, there'd be mass raids, almost certainly involving municipal, state, and federal enforcement officers, likely moving in on workplaces, schools, hospitals, churches in all 50 states, and checkpoints, show me your papers kind of thing. Once found and arrested, the throngs of migrants would need some place to be held for processing. This is where the camps come in. The state of Texas has already offered up land for a giant detention camp, roughly the size of 700 football fields. Then comes that processing. Anyone who's lived in the U.S. for at least 2 years, regardless of legal status, is entitled to a deportation hearing, a day in court, as it were, for all who qualify. When that happens, and if then ordered deported, out they go. At least that's the plan. Look, Trump wants to go big on this, and he wants to go as quickly as possible. Want to know if he's serious, Adrienne? Give a listen to Stephen Miller, arguably the most influential advisor to Trump on this issue. Here he is.
On day one, the southern border slams shut to illegal immigration. So all the illegal aliens all over the world who've been taking a free ride at America's expense for 4 years, guess what? You show up, you're not getting in, you're not getting through, you're not getting released, you're not going to any city anywhere in America. The only thing you're getting, courtesy of the U.S. taxpayer, is a flight back home.
Okay, tough talk. I mean, Catherine, if the Americans launch this mass deportation, and presumably it's a matter of when they launch it, is the expectation simply that there will just be a surge of people heading into Canada?
There are certainly warnings to that effect, Adrienne. You talk about former federal immigration minister, former premier of Alberta, Jason Kenney, has given that warning. Kelly Craft, who is Donald Trump's former ambassador to Canada, saying prepare. This country needs to be prepared for a major influx. And if that does happen, it's a challenge on a couple of fronts. Because of the Safe Third Country Agreement with the United States, anybody who wants to get into Canada and stay, they can't just come to an official border crossing. They would have to sneak across the border and stay in Canada undetected for 14 days. Now, they could, after those 14 days, then claim asylum. That is a challenge for Canada because there is a massive backlog of refugee claims. We're talking about 250,000. It would take years to process the claims that are already in the pipe. So if you add a lot of numbers to that, obviously a problem. But even if people continued to live underground, off the radar, the federal government has just cut back its own immigration targets, acknowledging them. When it comes to housing, when it comes to social services, there is a strain across the country, essentially that we are, to some extent, at capacity when it comes to taking on a greater number of new people. So add a big unexpected surge, that's a challenge on that front.
Thinking about what you just said about the rules, right, about the 14 days, I am guessing, though, that the rules as they exist now could very well change, right? We're not talking about forever rules depending on the situation. And, you know, on that note, when we're talking about numbers, if we look at what happened in Canada between 2016 and Trump's first year, when there was just a threat of mass deportations, look what happened to asylum seekers in Canada that year alone. Look at that jump. That is just on the threat of deportation. So clearly the operating presumption in Ottawa is that people will come and that it will be more than a threat, that the deportations will happen. Here's what NDP leader Jagmeet Singh told reporters yesterday about border security in general and what he thinks needs to happen.
We need to immediately hire 1,100 CBSA officers just to get back to the level where we can actually do the minimum required and then look at hiring more officers to do a better job of protecting Canadians. This is not just about making sure we prevent the trade tariffs that could hurt us directly, but it's also in our interest to do this.
So, Catherine, I mean, that's what the NDP wants to happen. What are your sources telling you that the Canadian government is actually going to do?
Yeah, it's interesting, Adrienne, the extent to which the Canadian government is being fairly tight-lipped about this. They say they don't want to engage in hypotheticals. At the same time, they're trying to offer assurances to Canadians that they have thought about these issues. And I have to tell you, this isn't just a conversation that's happening politically. The CBC radio show and political podcast that I host, The House, just last week we were at one of Canada's 3 immigration holding centres, and we were talking to senior officials within the Canada Border Services Agency. And we were told this question of taking on more people, be it in the holding centres, engaging in more deportations, these are things they have considered, things that they are prepared for. Of course, the government doesn't want to get things to that level, right? They want to stop people at the border and turn them around. And this is where, interestingly, Donald Trump's own interests dovetail with the Canadian government. He has been talking about drugs and human smuggling, drugs headed into the United States from Canada. And that has prompted the Canadian government to talk about how it wants to deal with the border, be it through drones, getting more helicopters, more resources on the border. All of those things would, of course, help as well if there was a surge coming in the other direction. It's really interesting, though, Adrienne, to contrast this moment to 2017, a famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it, tweet from Justin Trudeau, where he said when Trump was enacting his ban of people from several majority Muslim countries, to those fleeing persecution, terror, and war, Canada will welcome you regardless of your faith. The political climate is very different now. The politics of immigration in Canada have changed. This Trump administration appears that it is going to be a very different one. Right now, the Canadian government is preparing to spend about $250,000 on ads. This is a campaign they've been doing in recent years for people who are looking up how to claim asylum in Canada, warning them there are rules. It's a complex process. You have to follow the rules if you want to come here.
Yeah, they spent a long time backpedaling from that statement a while ago. I suppose, Paul, like Canada's in a position now of forewarned is forearmed, is making all these preparations. But bottom line, can Donald Trump actually really stage these mass deportations? Can it happen?
Yeah, it sure seems so. And look, the U.S. has done this before. Operation Wetback, for example, complete with its racist name. In the 1950s, it rounded up more than 1 million Mexicans for deportation, all in the name of protecting jobs for Americans. At the time, it was the biggest mass deportation program in American history. Trump's plan goes well beyond that. To execute it, he said he'd invoke what's called the Illegal Enemies Act from 1798, a piece of legislation meant for use during wartime. If he does that, he'd likely face court challenges. But if it goes to the U.S. Supreme Court, let's not forget the makeup of the bench would seem to be in Trump's favor. The big issue is probably money. Catherine mentioned Canada's immigration system being overwhelmed. Well, same thing in the U.S. And with this program, there'd need to be all kinds of new immigration judges, new enforcement agents, staff for the camps, food and transport for the detainees. Estimates vary, but the suggestion is to deport all 11 million, let's say you'd be talking some $150 billion over the course of time. That would need congressional approval, but guess what? Republicans just won control of Capitol Hill. Full speed ahead for Donald Trump.
Yeah, he'd surely get that. All right, Paul Hunter, Catherine Cullen, thank you.